April 1981. Keddie, California. Tucked into the Sierra Nevada foothills, this was an isolated resort community with a population barely breaking a few hundred. On a quiet Sunday morning, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp walked down the dirt path to Cabin 28, returning home from a sleepover at a neighbor's house. Inside, she found her mother, Sue, her teenage brother, John, and his friend Dana Wingate. All three had been bound with medical tape and killed with a level of brutality that stunned the first responders on the scene. The physical layout of the cabin immediately presented a logistical impossibility. Down a short hallway in a small back bedroom, three younger boys had been sleeping the entire night. They were found completely unharmed, having apparently slept through the entire attack. To complicate the scene further, Sheila's 12-year-old sister Tina was nowhere to be found. 45 years later, the Keddie cabin murders remain unsolved because the physical realities of the scene do not align with the logistics of the crime. Whoever entered Cabin 28 came prepared. The attackers used medical tape brought to the scene to bind the victims and utilized both a hammer and a knife during the struggle, indicating a chaotic but partially planned event. The floor plan shows tight constraints. The violent living room sits just feet from the undisturbed boys' bedroom. Outside, Cabin 26 sat dozens of feet away, and the Seabolt cabin sat exactly 15 feet from the murders. A multi-victim homicide involving blunt force and blade weapons occurred within a 15-foot radius of neighbors, yet not a single person reported hearing a sound. As local law enforcement arrived, they began reconstructing the movements of the victims in the hours leading up to the discovery. They established that John Sharp and Dana Wingate had spent the evening in the nearby town of Quincy, catching a ride back to the resort sometime after 10 p.m. Suspicion quickly fell on two men living in Cabin 26, Martin Smart and his house guest, John Bubiday. Bubiday was an ex-convict with documented ties to organized crime. The circumstantial evidence was significant. Smart had a documented personal conflict with Sue Sharp, and multiple witnesses saw both men at a local bar that night dressed in suits and ties, a sharp contrast to the typical rural attire of the area. Despite these leads, the investigation struggled. In 1981, rural departments lacked the forensic tools, like DNA testing, required to make sense of such a complex and contaminated crime scene. When local authorities requested state assistance, the response was baffling. Rather than sending homicide specialists, state officials dispatched an organized crime unit to investigate a local triple murder. The investigation possessed clear suspects and movements, yet the case stalled under a series of jurisdictional errors and inexplicable procedural decisions. Justice never arrived for the Sharp family. John Bubiday died in 1988, and Martin Smart died in 2006. Neither man ever faced a single charge in a court of law. The lack of resolution left a permanent scar on Keddie, turning the quiet resort into a place defined by its unsolved history. While the suspects escaped, the disappearance of 12-year-old Tina Sharp remained the investigation's most haunting unknown. 3 years after the murders, a discovery made deep in the woods, 62 miles from Keddie, reopened the case with a terrifying new set of questions. The fate of Tina Sharp took the case far beyond the limits of the Keddie resort. We'll examine that discovery and the new suspects it brought to light in Part 2.
In 2004, Cabin 28 was officially condemned and completely bulldozed, erasing the physical footprint of the murders from the landscape. For investigators, the starting point of the modern investigation is daunting. The two main suspects died decades ago, seemingly taking any answers to the grave with them. But Plumas County Sheriff Greg Hagwood, who personally knew the victims while growing up in the community, refused to let the case go cold. He pushed the investigation forward from the inside. Time and demolition tried to bury this case. The fact that it survived at all is an anomaly, an investigative vacuum kept alive almost entirely by the stubborn memory of the locals who lived through it. In April of 1984, searchers discovered human skull fragments in a remote, brush-heavy area of Butte County, 62 miles away from Keddie. They were confirmed to belong to Tina Sharp. To this day, the rest of her remains have never been found.
In the weeks following that discovery, an unidentified person called 911. The anonymous caller correctly identified the fragments as Tina's,
gave no further information, and hung up. Investigators did not hear that vital audio immediately. It was only found years later, physically buried at the bottom of an old, chaotic evidence box. These delayed, isolated discoveries kept the investigation in a state of suspended animation. Authorities were looking at a puzzle with too many missing pieces to form a clear timeline. When authorities formally reopened the case in 2013, they uncovered a letter written by prime suspect Marty Smart to his wife, Marilyn. In what investigators characterize as a near confession, Smart wrote that he had paid the price for her love and, in his own words, bought it with 4 people's lives. Psychological evidence later corroborated that letter. A therapist in Reno, Nevada came forward to report that Smart had explicitly confessed to the murders during a counseling session decades prior. Then, in 2016, a man using a metal detector recovered a hammer from a local pond near the cabins. It matched the precise description of a tool Smart had reported missing in 1981. By 2016, the historical evidence overwhelmingly pointed to Marty Smart. For anyone looking at the case files, it appeared tragically but definitively solved. That sense of closure evaporated in 2018, when investigators used modern technology to test the original tape used to bind the victims. This readout shows the results of that analysis. Forensic labs successfully extracted a positive DNA profile from the adhesive, but the profile completely failed to Marty Smart or his suspected accomplice, John Bubede. Logically, this DNA belongs to an unknown third party inside the cabin. Because it didn't match the deceased suspects, it points to someone still alive. This single biological data point proved the prime suspects did not act alone. It established the presence of a third person in the cabin, one whose identity remained unknown to investigators for decades. As of early 2026, incoming DNA evidence continues to point towards additional living individuals who may have been involved in the crime. No names have been released and no charges have been filed, but the nature of the case has officially transitioned from a dormant historical mystery to an active hunt. The physical cabin is gone, and the original suspects took their secrets to the grave, but modern science guarantees that whoever else was in that room 45 years ago is still being hunted today. If you want to see which mystery I cover next, subscribe. New investigations every week.